All right, everyone. Hello. Welcome back to Dan's Astrology. I'm your host, Dan. Today is April the 29th. It's the day after the Canadian election. Looks like we've got a minority government for Carney and the Liberals, which was about what I was expecting. That comes to me, anyways, as some good news coming on the heels of a lot of bad news or a lot of difficult events happening, especially where I live. I'm a resident of the greater Vancouver area, and there was just recently a tragedy, vehicular homicide, where somebody crashed their vehicle into a street festival that was happening for the Filipino community in Vancouver. I don't know. I don't know what to say about it. We don't Vancouver, you know, sometimes we have some violent things happening, but usually not on this scale. Usually we don't have mass shootings or mass violence in Vancouver. And so it was a pretty horrible thing to happen. And then in the midst of all this other things going on at a more global level, and I have to admit, I don't know, I've sort of been hesitating to talk about this, or I've been holding off from recording a video partly because I could sense all this stuff in motion, and I just wanted to give some space to just see what was going on before making a video about it. And at the point of making this video, Mars is at 4 degrees Leo, Pluto's at 3 degrees Aquarius, so there's still a Mars-Pluto opposition in effect by an orb of 1 degree. The good news, anyways, is that that opposition is starting to separate. So if you were to look at all the crazy or just, I mean, Mars is a malefic. Mars opposite Pluto is generally a pretty gnarly aspect. You could see this pattern before with what happened with Luigi Mangione when he assassinated the CEO, and at least with that there was maybe some a little bit of Robin Hood, kind of it wasn't just innocent people getting killed like what happened in Vancouver. So I don't know. I'm a little bit, you guys can understand I have a bit of resistance to getting into all this stuff, but I figured I would list off a bunch of things that I've just noticed happening around this transit in terms of current events. Don't expect me to go into huge amounts of detail though. So I'm just going to list a bunch of things off. There was a woman who was a victim of Jeffrey Epstein, who has had charges against Prince Andrew, and she is apparently died of a suicide. Although, I'll just mention there's something about Mars Pluto where there may be reason to be suspicious, right? Did the woman who is a star witness against the royal family, against the Epsteins, against that whole power network, did this woman actually kill herself, or was she suicided by some I'm not saying I know, I'm just saying that there's reason perhaps to have some suspicion. That's one thing that I noticed happen. There is a protest of a group of Irish rappers at Coachella where they made some explicit remarks in support of the Palestinians. That created some controversy, stirred up some hot water. There is stuff happening in America around the deportation of political people who are targeted for political reasons or scapegoated or for whatever, being sent to this prison in El Salvador. It's been all over the news. I don't have to go into too much around this. There was there's signs that the El Salvador people are starting to sort of buckle under the pressure because they made a photo op showing the guy Garcia looking relatively healthy. Although this could also be a Pluto thing, because it's sort of like there may be an attempt to like cover up or hide whatever mistreatment this guy may be having by giving it, like taking a picture of him on a poolside spa sipping a cocktail kind of thing, to make like, so there's a certain sort of, there's something to do with Pluto, and I think like a bit maybe, well, I mean, it's, if there's deception there, it's pretty thin. I don't think they're really fooling anybody by trying to make it look better than it is. There's also this thing that happened with a judge named Hannah Dugan, who was arrested for apparently helping a guy who was having a pretrial for a misdemeanor involving like an argument with his roommate. And I don't know, ICE wanted to like just skip past all due process and deport this guy. And apparently the judge just told these guys to talk to some sort of superior. These guys went to go to a different office, and then the guy who they were wanted basically walked down the hall past a couple DEA officers who didn't arrest, and then like he just went out the door with his lawyer. And because like this, like it sounds like a very strange, and then we had this big spectacle where these FBI agents are posting on social media pictures of this judge getting arrested in a very spectacular way, saying that this is like evidence that or whatever, like that nobody's above the law. And this is like somebody who, like, what this judge is guilty of is directing a bunch of federal agents to speak to her superior, and you know, it's like there's very like little grounds for her doing anything wrong in this situation. And you've also got like people who are basically in a rush to deport people to some like torture prison that's a legal black hole where there's no due process, and they just, and meanwhile this guy is in a pretrial for a misdemeanor. It's like absolutely bizarre, basically. And you know, there's something about, okay, I guess I can go into some of the art. What I'm noticing about the Mars Pluto dynamic around this is there's a quote from Carl Jung which says that the surest way to beat the devil is with patience, because the devil has no patience himself. And there's something about like this whole like, if you have a criminal justice system and innocent before proven guilty and everybody gets due process and stuff like that, it requires a certain amount of patience. And there's something about I don't like to be too morally black and white, but I think there's a certain kind of like evilness of the Trump regime, of just like, regardless of whether or not you agree or disagree with, you know, like immigration reform or trying to deal with undocumented immigrants, there's some sort of like principle where if you do that in a way that is very impatient, that doesn't give anyone due process, and you're just in a like blazing hurry to send people to the most violent, terrible ends as quickly as possible, it sort of gives away that you don't have the patience, or you don't have the maturity to do things the proper way, and there's something suspicious about doing everything so quickly. And similarly, on this note, a more of a smaller thing that happened, not like less serious in terms of global politics, was that here in Kelowna, or here in British Columbia anyways, there's a golf course on Kelowna where people just started having a fist fight on a golf course. And it was like some guy's birthday, and like basically the fight broke out because this, like, I don't know, I'm not a golfer, but I imagine that part of the appeal of golfing is that compared to a sport like say playing tennis, or compared to a sport like playing basketball or something like that, you get to sort of like leisurely take your time, enjoy the fresh air. You can like, you know, you don't have to be playing golf like you're in a big rush, and if it's your birthday, you can be kind of socializing and relaxing and celebrating and stuff like that. But apparently, if you're doing this in Kelowna, you've got a bunch of like people that if you're golfing too slow, people are gonna just start like hitting, like trying to hit golf balls at you and like intimidate you to make you speed up. And it's like these guys who are like like they can't like slow down their golf game, that they have, so they end up getting in fist fights with these people who are having a birthday party. It's like what a terrible birthday, where you're like, oh, let's go and celebrate with my friends for my birthday, and then you end up getting into a fist fight because you don't golf fast enough. It's like, I think this is like similar to like, you can like a similar vibe or similar energy to this like whatever's happening with American politics. There's like there's a lack of patience where where if there is some sort of redeemable, if you're trying to like present what you're doing in a just and good way, it's better to do it in a way that's patient and in a way that's fair, rather than coming off like some like testosteronal rage freak who has no sense of common decency for like having a civilized, like, you know, like even if this is your culture, if you're like, I'm not saying like, like let's shut down all the golf courses and turn them into social housing and, take all the rich people's money away. But I'm saying, even if you like golf courses, even if you like that culture, you're not really doing yourself a service by making that a place where you just get into fistfights because nothing's happening as fast as you want it to, right? It's just odd, anyways. This is kind of what the vibe of the more, and I mean, you could also see this, unfortunately, in the terrible tragedy that happened in Vancouver, where you basically had a guy in a fit of rage, I suppose, slamming on the gas pedal into a crowd of people, right? There's this kind of thing about Mars and being impatient and in speed and just like plowing over crowds of innocent people because you are upset with the way things are. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just psychologizing. Who knows what was going on? But you can read what happened from this point of view of being angry, frustrated. I'm not getting what I want. Look at all these other people who are happier than for me. And it's like the same thing. It's like, oh, like, fuck these. Look at these happy people having a birthday party and they're too slow. I'm just going to start hitting my golf balls at them. Like, it's like the same kind of thing. Like, oh, a bunch of people having a street festival. And I'm unhappy. I'm just going to take my rage out against them. This seems to be what was going on with this Mars-Pluto transit, right? And similarly, there's also things in the news. There's a terrorist attack in India. There was vandalism of Hindu and Sikh temples here in BC. I'm not quite up on the dynamic around that. I think the violence happened in the Kashmir region of India, where there was violence against tourists. I know that. I don't know. I've never been to India. I think the Kashmir region is maybe a tourist destination. There could be a kind of, I don't know what the deal is about why that happened. Also, in the midst of all this stuff, I think it's worth noting that the internet forum 4chan, which has a bad reputation as being like the sort of the slime pit of the, like, all the trolls and all the unsavory elements of the internet congregate in 4chan. And honestly, I've never was much of a 4chan guy. It wasn't really my vibe, but there was a lot of 4chan. It was kind of interesting to put this in context because a lot of what happened around the first election of Donald Trump was kind of like people were talking about how there was a lot of support for Donald Trump on 4chan, or that it was kind of like there's a sort of like the mainstream liberal centrist kind of what was considered normal was somehow seen as like there's all these guys who didn't fit into that, who were like socially unacceptable and who were maybe disenfranchised by the liberal political regime, and these kind of like angsty, disenfranchised young men are basically seen as the main people who would go on 4chan and the people who would post like Pepe Cult of Keck memes or whatever, like that whole. I mean, maybe I don't have to explain this, right? Maybe I don't know who's watching, but 4chan got hacked, got shut down, and so we've just experienced. I think it's kind of like an end of the era, really, right? And it also kind of, I think it sort of marks a certain sea change where there is a kind of like, in the Trump first presidency, it was like kind of like this moment where all the losers or all the people who were seen as too unsavory for mainstream representation, all of a sudden there was this movement of like, now you guys have to pay attention to us, or now you have to pay attention to the 4chan guys and take them more seriously, because they're these, they're like disenfranchised people who don't feel like they're represented, and now they're getting their revenge or something by supporting Trump, and now they're the real guys you have to pay attention to, because, and now there's something about this where it's like that, it feels like that particular fruit has become ripe and fallen off the tree and now is beginning to rot on the ground, and the worms are coming out of it and stuff, and it's like that 4chan is dead basically at this point, right? And so it's like, I think there's something about how like Trump first presidency, people taking 4chan more seriously, versus now 4chan is apparently dead. I don't know if it's going to come back in some other form, but that is these are the things I have been noticing around this transit, and so the other thing about this is that Mars is in Leo, right? So Mars will be in Leo until June 17th, until that's when about the time it ingresses into Virgo. And between now and then, Mars and Leo will also square Uranus and Taurus, which should be interesting. Although before that happens, we're going to have Saturn ingress into Aries, conjoining Neptune. We're going to be having Jupiter ingressing into Cancer. We're going to be having lots of big transits, lots of big ingresses happening before Mars squares Uranus, and then before Mars ingresses into Virgo. In terms of, I was just thinking about making this video in terms of just kind of addressing all the stuff that's happened under this transit. I also made a video recently about the Pope passing away after J.D. Vance met the Pope, and that reminds me, there's another thing that I have to admit, I'm stealing this one from a guy named Steve Judd. Steve Judd pointed out that Trump has Mars in Leo, Elon Musk has Mars in Aquarius, and J.D. Vance has Mars in Scorpio. So for those who are astute astrologically, you will notice that those are all fixed signs, and you will also notice that what we just went through was a fixed sign T-square. And so one thing to watch for is that, although I have to admit, I'm kind of just copying Steve Judd here, but that there could be tensions beginning, or fissures, or the fault lines beginning to show between the power, the balance of power, or the power dynamic between Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and Elon Musk. There is also this question about all the trouble that's going on, basically around Garcia, now around Dugan, or all the El Salvador stuff, and possibly a lot of other problems in America, as well as the trade wars and all that. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's this issue about whether or not Donald Trump's going to get impeached. What's going to happen? Is this just going to be like Donald Trump, or we're going to end up having J.D. Vance take over? And is that necessarily going to be any better? Or is Elon Musk somehow going to change his approach, right? Is Elon Musk going to split from Trump? Because you have to also notice that during the first Trump presidency, the people that he had around him as his allies didn't stay that way for very long, right? Even people like his biggest supporters like Bannon, he ended up having a kind of a split from, right? So there could be, with this Mars transit over the next couple of months, you could start to see the Musk, Vance, and Trump power dynamics start to break apart a little bit, right? There's something else that I'm just gonna, you know what? This is obviously, there's obviously a lot of gnarly stuff going on in this transit video, and I have to admit that I also have a little bit of hesitancy about I mean, it is what it is. We have a lot of violence, a lot of abuse of power, a lot of bad stuff happening. I at least, I don't know. I'm not naive about Mark Carney. Although I have to say that I am at least relieved that he won and not Pierre Poilievre. I also would like to acknowledge that it does appear that I do have a certain number of my viewers in my audience are conservatives and who don't support the same politics as I do. And at least I suppose it's a good thing that I have been able to cultivate an audience that goes beyond the echo chamber or the filter bubble, that I have a diverse audience, that I'm not just isolated in a echo chamber of a bunch of people who think the same way I do. So I don't want to be overly hostile towards people who have different political beliefs, but I am very clearly just not. I'm not the kind of person who's ever going to vote conservative or who's ever going to adopt an attitude of right-wing populism. And one thing that, if you're watching this channel, I'm not trying to hide the fact that I'm basically I would describe myself as being against populism, right? And I would describe populism as any kind of political regime that just seeks to rile people up by playing to, by trying to trigger people into an emotional thing rather than by dealing with things in a rational, cool-headed way, right? By basically trying to get people angry or trying to scapegoat some kind of minority, or like the fascists would do or something like that. It's just not, I'm never going to go that way. With all this in mind, there's something going on about all this. Before, I was making notes trying to decide what to do for this video before all this stuff. Well, I mean, I guess in between last video and this video, I was trying to sketch things out. And one of the things that came to mind was I've been taking a break. I went through a period of time where I was taking a bunch of courses from Weird Studies, and then eventually I decided to take a break from all that. And I still support Weird Studies, and I still think one of the better podcasts out there, and I'm still really into this stuff. But I just felt like I needed to take a break from it. But one of the things that the funny thing about it is that one of the classes the courses that we took was a course on William Shakespeare's Macbeth. And I have to admit that I am, as a person who is, what can I say? I'm a little schizo bipolar, and although I appreciated the Macbeth course, it kind of tripped me out a little bit. There is apparently Macbeth is actually more than just a play. It's a real. It includes all the witch stuff in Macbeth is actually real witchcraft, basically, or there's some kind of strain of like real magic in Macbeth, to the point where when people put on Macbeth plays, there's often all kinds of strange and spooky things that happen. And like there's all this kind of weird lore around it, I guess you would say. Like one of the weird things about Macbeth is that there's this scene in Macbeth where the god Hecate is a character. And now the god Hecate is associated with black magic, right? And there's a lot of superstition around Hecate, to the point where most plays where they perform Macbeth, they remove the Hecate scene, right? So it's like 9 times out of 10, you go watch a play, or recording, or a movie, or a play of Macbeth, and they have to omit this scene using the Hecate, which is like, she's a goddess of the crossroads. She's a goddess of associated with things like black magic. And there's a certain, whether you think this is just a superstition or if you believe in this stuff, like there, I mean, I don't know. Maybe this is the whole thing. Is like I don't want to stir up trouble by bring this element into it, right? But there's something about Macbeth where part of what happens in Macbeth is that the King Duncan, who is murdered by Macbeth, there's a sort of polarity where Duncan is presented as being overly naive, or like being there's a sort of like the whole thing, balance of good and evil, where Duncan is like the good king who is, but presented in a very innocent, gentle kind of king, whereas Macbeth is like the guy who does his dirty work, right? The guy who is like who is a brutal warrior on the battlefield, right? And there's something about this whole dynamic where I don't know, I think there's something about understanding all of the bad stuff that's happened between around this Mars-Pluto dynamic, and maybe you could also see it with, I was thinking about this with J.D. Vance and the Pope, right? Because the Pope is a fairly progressive, or was a fairly progressive Pope, or kind of is, there's a certain kind of like conflict between like this kind of progressive ideal versus there's some kind of dirty business that we don't want to deal with, right? Or that we have to, and whether you want to point your finger at any particular war or political conflict or whatever, there's always this kind of friction where nobody, if you're like a politician, you don't want to like put on your platform that, you know, our political values are that we are brutal conquerors and we're gonna like, you know, we're totally in favor of like, you know, destroying people and killing them and intimidating them and stuff like that. But the thing is, it's like if you don't, you have to like understand that the shadow or like the God and the devil, right? That there's a line from Tom Waits that he says, you know, there's no such thing as the devil. There's only God when he's drunk, right? That maybe God and the devil, maybe there's a duality between good and evil, God and the devil. Maybe this is something that we just create in our minds, and they're actually the same guy, and that we create this funny split world because we can't handle that the whole totality has a lot of bad shit in it as well as a lot of good shit in it, right? Or whatever. Like a lot of good, there's a lot of things to be thankful for. There's got a lot of good stuff in life, but there's also a really ugly part of life. And with a Mars-Pluto transit, like the one we've just had, it's like we've obviously had a lot of ugly, bad things that we've had to pay attention to. But there's something, I'm not suggesting that there's any sort of, but there's something about the meeting of like Vance and the Pope sort of reminds me of I'm not suggesting that J.D. Vance made a Macbeth maneuver on the Pope, but there's some kind of conflict where there's some sort of person who represents a kind of moral virtue versus a politician who is representing can we call them a fascist regime, or is that hyperbole at this point? Is it accurate to say that you like an unscrupulous politician versus somebody who's represents the moral decency and virtue? There's something about these two polarities where when the two meet, some sparks fly or something like that, right? And there's something about how, there's something about, the war and the progressive ideal that I think there's a lot of people who don't want to vote or don't want to politically support wars, but there's some kind of like, the more you identify with that, the more you are making a shadow out of the warrior who has to do your dirty work to just like, at some level there's some kind of like dirty business that has to be done in order to just like keep this sort of safe liberal society the way it is. But there's always kind of feels like this is like an exiling process that involves basically sending people to the gulags, the prisons, or taking it out on some sort of minority or scapegoating somebody, and that we view the people who do that as evil, bad people. But the more that we are associated as being the good guys and that we can't identify with that, there's some sort of polarity, you know what I'm saying? And I think that basically the story of MacBeth is a story of these extreme polarities, that like what happens when, these things have to be in a balance. There has to be a kind of, a communication, or that we can't be too naive about our leadership being just some totally innocent lily white, like we're just going to make the world a better place, and then we're just going to be completely ignorant and naive of all these bad things happening, right? But I think there's more like, it also creates this weird situation when, like, in order to be functional, right, we have to be, like, there's a certain expectation that everybody has to be positive and cheery or in a good mood or sociable, and that we're not going to like dwell on the negative, and we're not going to like, talk too much about but there's something about it where like we all kind of know there's some bad, dirty business happening under the surface, but nobody really wants to talk about it. And it sort of feels like, are we complicit in all this if we are living a comfortable life? And that there's a good movie that came out recently by the guy Jonathan Glazer called A Zone of Interest, which is all about Nazis who live next door to Auschwitz, and they're just being like, what's it like to live a comfortable life, or to live a life of luxury right next door to all these people who are suffering, right? And that there's like the split between this sort of like this sort of happy, innocent sort of like versus the side of things we don't want to look at, right? And I think that it's like the terrible tragedy of what happened in Vancouver, I feel is like kind of example of this, because it's something kind of funny, because like, I grew up in this area, and people with always saying that Vancouver is like the most livable city, right? Or it's one of the most beautiful places to live and all this kind of stuff. It's such a great place. And then it's like, there's the other side of it. And it's just like, how can you say that when there are so many people on the street, and there's so many people addicted to drugs, and there's so many people caught up in crime and poverty and violence, and yet this is the most livable city? And it's kind of like there's this kind of thing where it's like there's a certain group of people, it's there for them it's very comfortable, for them it's very livable, but there's this whole shadow other side to it. Or there's like this kind of thing where and I'm not going to get into just like, there's something about I'll give it like, I don't know, for some reason it's reminding me that Oh, I don't know. I don't want to get into personal stories or whatever. I don't want to bring up anybody's personal stories, but there's something about like you could. There's so many times where people like. I guess it goes with that whole thing. I think with Pluto, there's something about what's hidden, right? And I think it could go with this kind of like attitude that like everybody is fighting some kind of battle, and that you don't know. People may present an image that they're happy, but they may have some sort of inner struggle that you're not realizing, and that I think there's so often people may be suffering, and they think that other people are having it easy or having a good time, and they're just the it's just me who's pissed off, who's angry, who's suffering, and everybody else is happy, and I resent them. But it's just sort of like it's just odd because I think we're the way we approach talking about things sort of reinforces this, because it's like instead of like we seem to have this we always seem to like omit things and just say that like, oh, what a wonder, we're so lucky to live in this place, what a wonderful community we have, I'm so glad that I don't live in this other like a war zone or an impoverished country, we live in one of the greatest places in the world, and then but what about all these problems, right? Or like if this place is so, if we live in such a great place, like why is it that what motivates a person to commit acts of mass violence, right? And when I think that when people say it's like, oh, this person has a mental health issue, it's like a way that to like avoid, it's like kind of almost like not really dealing with the problem. I mean, sure, maybe the person has a mental health issue, but it starts to be like, the more you think about this in terms of like, what is it? Oh, he just needs chemicals, right? If this guy just had a couple more, serotonin molecules floating around in his brain, he would just be happy and content with his life, and he wouldn't be, yeah, right, you really think that's all it is? It's just like a bit, you just need a little bit of a chemical, we'll just adjust the chemistry a little bit, and then nobody's going to be freaking out and killing each other, right? Like, it seems, this is an awfully naive way to look at things, right? And I think that there's oftentimes the veneer of positivity is hiding a dark shadow that we don't want to look at, and that we don't want to address the underlying problems of like why some people are so discontent, right? And I think that if we had a way to be more upfront about it and to be more honest about it, and deal with some of these problems, it wouldn't be like, because I just feel like in these kind of tragedies where you have, it's like an extreme imbalance, right? Where you have a lot of people, you could have something that is like a wonderful thing of people being happy and embracing their community and a good thing, and then you have people who are, I don't know, I can't say I understand what was going through the guy's head, but you have some person who is just smoldering with all this angst and rage and hatred or whatever it is, and that there's a kind of an imbalance with like something that is good and something that is bad, and if there's some way to have a bit of a dialogue that isn't just extreme violence, or you know what I'm saying, that there isn't just like there's something about, it's like about like, it's like this kind of thing, like if you were to get like a bunch of really cold ice cubes, and if you were going to get like really hot boiling water, and you're to drop the extreme cold thing into this extreme hot thing, you would get a much more violent reaction than if you were to drop the ice cubes into the lukewarm water, or you know what I'm. So there's something about to sort of like at first this may seem like it's a, to the detriment of this really pure, beautiful, good thing, that we are criticizing it, right? Or that we are negating it or something like that by tempering it out. I think maybe like the Temperance card might go with this, right? Like tempering it a little bit so you don't have this extremely positive but naive thing, being this innocent victim of this really ugly, negative, hateful thing, right? That there needs to be, I think, as we mature as a society, that we integrate the shadow, basically, that we can have a way for there to be a little bit of like, how do we get the good stuff to the person who's really suffering, and how do we balance out this kind of naive, innocent, good thing with a little bit of like a little bit of the bad thing to sort of temper it out, to maybe that reduces the risk of these explosive, these really weird imbalances, right? I don't know. Maybe you guys can see what I'm trying to say here. I don't know what that means in practical terms. I'm just approaching this from the point of view of the archetype, right? That there does, and I don't think that this is like, I don't think this is the same as saying one thing is polarized against the other. Like there's just some kind of polarity, but I think that I just feel like another good example of this is Twin Peaks, right? Because Twin Peaks is all about like this idea that you have a kind of this white picket fence kind of, there's a certain ideal of the good, as in like a good neighborhood, a good place to raise your kids, a good kind of small town community or something like that, versus the underworld of crime and violence and drugs and prostitution and abuse and it goes on and on and on, right? And so that there's some kind of thing where the world that we live in isn't just one of these images, it's both of them and even more of that we're not even aware of. That the world is basically endless and just spilling over with so much stuff that it includes all of it, all the good stuff and all the bad stuff in this big jumbled up mess. But the more that we are if we can only have space to live in a world where everything is nice, then the more that we are basically unconscious of so many different factors, and that these unconscious factors it's like some terrorist attack that catches us unaware, that we're totally unprepared for some bad thing that's going to happen because the common reality that we share, we can only talk about nice things for the sake of being positive, because we don't want to deal with the ugly side of life, right? And I think that there's the more mature direction for, if you want to say, spiritual evolution or the evolution of consciousness, is basically integrating the shadow, so that our idea of the good, the beautiful, the true isn't something that is like the PG-13 Disney movie that has to omit all this stuff for the sake of making it family friendly or something like that, right? That the version of good that has to censor and omit and keep out all this bad stuff for the sake of having this sort of like kind of like infantile version of what the good is not actually all that good, because that it's like the more innocence, this kind of naive innocence archetypally constellates the loss of innocence and the abuse of innocence, or the evil thing that isn't innocent, right? As soon as you introduce something that is the essence of a very pure naive innocence, you get its opposite, which is that which is going to take advantage of it, which is that which is absolutely the other direction. And the more that we live in a world full of these polarized extremes, the more there's going to be these tragic events, right? I don't know. And it's easy, maybe it's, I don't know, it's easier for me to sound like a smartass by saying that I know, if anyone reads a bit of Carl Jung, this isn't rocket science, right? There should be plenty of people who are on the same page. I don't know, maybe maybe I shouldn't be calling myself maybe I don't know, maybe I'm being too self-deprecating by calling myself a smartass here. maybe I'm being too self-defeating and putting myself down. But there's something... I just thought, anyways, we'd be wrong to just skip past all this stuff that's happened without taking note of it. There's another problem with one of the things that was in MacBeth that I remember was this line about how it was like you would hear in Scotland, there was a certain time where you would hear screams of people getting robbed or getting killed or dying in the night, and there'd be no... You would hear it but not register it, or that it would just be this like sort of sense of chaos where all this bad stuff was happening, but nobody was registering that the bad stuff was happening. Nobody was there. There was this kind of stuff of just like, it's like, in order to have some, you have to, like, it's better to have a good that is aware of all the bad stuff that's happening, that doesn't block it out, that doesn't censor it, that doesn't sweep it under the rug, rather than just being like you are living in this kind of naive state, but when you go out, you can hear people getting robbed and murdered and killed all around you, and yet you're just like pretending that's not happening, or there's no registering that problem is there. If that's your situation, it's like you don't want to have a good that's completely blind to the reality of the situation it's in, because that's not very good, basically, right? And I think there's some kind of, I don't know, this is basically what these transits have brought up for me, how I interpret it. Anyways, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for next time. Thanks for supporting the channel. Please like and subscribe. Tell your friends. I do astrology readings. I do natal charts if anyone's interested. You can hit me up. All right, thanks.